What is up, everybody? Welcome back to the Dynasty Rankings podcast. I'm your host, Nate Liss. You can find me on Twitter at an outraged Jew. And of course, with me is Alexander MacKenzie. You can find him on Twitter at Jacked Up on Mountain Dew. Alexander, this is a big day for me. Look, I brought the new t-shirt out. This is the Step Brothers, Jamar Chase, Joe Burrow. I gotta start advertising these. I gotta start getting some ad revenue money from this. Right? I mean, I can't continue to do this and advertise these shirts. And I'm buying on Etsy, by the way. Great place to find these shirts. If you guys have interest in any of these NFL mashup shirts. The other day was a Jackson Smith and Jigba shirt. Kind of had that 1990s hip hop flavor. Beautiful shirt. So Alexander, like on this week's episode, you and I had talked, and we're 6 weeks into the NFL season currently. Some teams are 0-6. Some teams are 1-5. Some teams are 2-4. And if you have a roster that is having trouble competing with some of the top teams in the league, and you're having the realization that maybe you're not a contending team, and you're wondering, okay, how can I right this ship? How can I figure out how to modify this roster to prepare myself for next year? This might be the episode for you. Now, admittedly, you never want to go down without a fight. And one of my philosophies in trading, I like to trade before the season starts. And I don't really like to do much in the first couple of weeks if I'm confident with the team that I have, because we're waiting for players to develop. We're waiting for information. And when you hit this point in the season right here, this is when people start to have the real reality of crunch of like what their team is, what their roster is, what their picks could be next year, right? All of these items. So I'm really interested to talk about a few of these players. Now, I can tell your camera is going in and out, which means the mic might be going in and out. So Alexander, can you hear me? Are you here with us?
I can hear. I apologize. You know, it's coming in and out. I don't understand. But try to make best with what we've got here for right now.
In your defense, your camera looks like you're somebody that's doing like a CBS interview out of like anonymity. Like they don't want people to know who they are. I'm much older. When I was growing up, there were some TV shows on the weekends where it was called like Magic Tricks Revealed. And like these well-known magicians wouldn't want you to know who they were, so they'd wear like a black mask and they'd show you how to do these magic tricks as if some other magician out there would want to go and kill them or beat them up because they revealed a magic trick which we knew was fake in the beginning. But you're coming in clear now, so this is good.
I'm right in here in it and reporting live.
Yeah, you're whatever it is, bad internet. I don't think the bad internet connection is maybe the same as warfare, but let's move on.
No, it's not. No, absolutely
so not. With that being said, let's talk about a player that I think there has been a lot of concern about since last season, flowing into this season, and we're seeing a little bit of a change. And of course, this is Deshaun Watson. But when I talk about the change that we're seeing, the sample size that we have seen over the last year and a half has really sort of changed people's opinions on what we saw from Deshaun Watson over the first, 3 years of his NFL career while he was in Houston. I mean, this was a guy that amongst many of the dynasty ranking services was a top 4, top 3 quarterback for many, many years. And now here he is after the issues that took place in Houston, coming to Cleveland, didn't look like himself in Cleveland in year 1, and now in year 2, still much of the same with just a subtle change.
Yeah, I agree. I think really we've got like a 9-game sample of what the Deshaun Watson looks like in Cleveland. And really, for right now with 9 games through, he doesn't look like the same player. He's QB 20 currently in passer rating while he was QB 2 last year. And again, this is through 9 games, but his yards per attempt are down a whole 2 yards from like 8.9 to like 6.7. And he was QB what? He was top 5 QB in points per game with like 23.5. Now he's QB 11 with 18.5. I think really what you got is the 2020 version Watson was this prolific passer, top rating in fantasy points per game, top rating in passer rating, super efficient with a 70% completion percentage. His final year in Houston, I think what we're getting is we're accumulating these games of a 9-game sample, and we're starting to see really what Deshaun Watson actually is, and I feel like based off of what the numbers are telling us, he's not the same player that he was in Houston, and he's one of these guys that you could potentially sell to a team that's a contender that is looking for some potential upside. Maybe they see the upside in Watson, but for your rebuilding rosters, Watson loses Chubb, just has Amari Cooper. Amari Cooper's getting up there in age. Donovan Peoples-Jones and Elijah Moore haven't seemed to be as fruitful as everyone had kind of hoped to be. It's one of those things where I think really what we're seeing is what Deshaun Watson is currently in the NFL versus like projecting that he may be this more, the prolific passer that he was previously.
It's a fair assessment, and it's unfortunate to hear, going into the year, there were a lot of people that I had chatted with that were very, very high on Deshaun Watson. Now, Watson's faced some defenses that have been tough on quarterbacks. Even last year, Tennessee, I think, has kept teams to week 3 when we're looking at these stats here, has kept teams to, bottom 10 in the league in fantasy points per game. But there's just this mounting feeling when it's associated with Deshaun Watson that people are losing interest. He's losing market value. People are actually just waiting for the cliff. I think at this point, we've gotten to a point now where we're almost waiting for Deshaun Watson to fall flat on his face. He's still top 12 in pass attempts. He's averaging 34 per game. Cleveland is a top 11 graded pass blocking offensive line, so that's good. But he's at a career low in TD rate at 3.9%. The one advantage to Deshaun Watson, which has always been rarely talked about, is that throughout his career, Deshaun Watson has averaged about 4.5 to 5 carries per game. He's still giving you that rushing floor now. I mean, this is a guy that's had, borderline 90 rush attempts annually for many of the seasons in the NFL. But right now, you can see him and falling. Deshaun Watson, the QB 17. Now, guys, this is a different website. We are not on Keep Trade Cut. This is a website that I kind of stumbled across. I talked to the owners of it. They seem pretty cool. It's fantasycalc.com. One big difference between it and Keep Trade Cut. By the way, why am I doing all these freaking advertisements? The one big difference between it and Keep Trade Cut is rather than using market consensus, people coming in and picking what player they want to keep, trade, and cut, it's aggregating a multitude of trades across my fantasy league, across Sleeper, and it's looking at them based on league size settings, which you can set up at the top here. And then it ranks the players based on actual trades. Now, to me, that's as close as you get to ADP because people are actually executing with risk. On Keep Trade Cut, again, love the website. There's really no risk to the choices that are being made. So with that said, right now, Deshaun Watson is the QB 17 on Fantasy Calc, which puts him right about in range with a 2024 first next year. They don't currently have these picks divided up between early, mid, and late. So we'll have to make some assumptions here. It's kind of an aggregate value, so we'll call it mid in this case. I guess my question for you, Alexander, knowing what we've seen from Deshaun Watson and the past and the present, when we look at the guys that are currently rated next to him, now Kirk Cousins is a name that comes up, currently QB 18, 7 years older, may not be in Minnesota forever. That's a guy that's sort of within this window. What would it take for you to move off of Watson into Cousins? Would it take Cousins plus for you to move off Watson despite the fact that Fantasy Calc says they are side by side in value?
I think really, yeah, I think it would probably be Cousins plus. I mean, I'd be very willing to get, maybe a upside receiver in place with Cousins for Watson and I think that move alone would help me be able to get a guy that I know who has throughout his entire career been a prolific passer. And he's still 35 years old, that I think anywhere he goes, he's going to make that offense significantly better, regardless of the weapons. That I think, Cousins plus would probably be anybody like maybe a wide receiver like Rashee Rice added in on it and move the needle, or maybe some upside, maybe even a more upside wide receiver to move that needle. So
the concern for me is I think people are really worried about Watson. And I like Cousins, and that was the first name I threw at you. Now, obviously, going into the preseason, I was pretty high on Bryce Young out of this class. I think Young has actually looked a lot better than people had anticipated coming into the year. It's been rocky with this Carolina team, but that's a player that I also wouldn't be totally afraid to move off of Watson into. My concern is that, yes, Watson has this monster contract, which has him insulated and really has Cleveland in a bind. I mean, the same way Russell Wilson, think about the conversations with Russell Wilson just a few days ago prior to these last couple games when people were like, hey, calm down. Russell Wilson and Patrick Mahomes are not so different in their 2023 production. But people were talking about like what it would take for them to get out of the Russell Wilson contract. And that's a conversation with Deshaun Watson, which very well could take place in the future. Now, I'm not polling the alarm on Deshaun Watson necessarily, but the up and down production that you've seen from him over the last 2 years is cause for concern, at least from the perspective of how much variance do you want out of a player who originally was supposed to give you essentially top 5, top 6 production at the position. He's fallen more than 10 quarterback spots over the last year and a half, and if the play continues, I don't know how much further he can really fall, to be quite honest with you. If you look at the list of quarterbacks below him, it's short of Jordan Love going on a heater or Sam Howell going on an absolute heater. He's not going to fall below Stafford, not falling below Geno, not falling below Russell or Desmond, probably not falling below Carr. Like, I think he's pretty much locked in at QB 17, 18. Like, that's about as far as he's going to fall at this point. So, with that being said, he's now a back of the top teens, borderline quarterback 20 option. So there are people that are still confident in him. My confidence has been shaken over the last year or so. If I can make my way into Bryce Young, who has looked decent over the last couple weeks, and we know they're going to invest in him, I would be willing to do that. Kirk Cousins, the age gap is the scariest part of this. But if Watson was on the last year of his contract versus Kirk Cousins, that would be a much closer conversation for me based on the performance. But I think that contract has really kept him insulated. So that's a tough one. But if you have Deshaun Watson and you are a rebuilder, I would in all sincerity consider it, especially if he continues to play even reasonably well, because as Alexander cited, he opened up the year with a 21.7 point game, and then just last week, 21.2 points, 2 top 10 performances. And I know for the people that loved Watson, that was like recency bias. Now they're drawn all the way back in, ready to get hurt again, Alexander.
Yeah, no, again, I think there would be opportunity if he could potentially get better, I think, to potentially sell. But I think the yards per attempt are significantly lower from his top 5 upside, and you can use the contract with insulation to, sell that to whoever you're trying to, buy from.
And I want to say this too, because I know that there's people that are like, Bryce Young, Kirk Cousins. Look, obviously, if you guys can make your way into Brock Purdy, if you can make your way into Kyler Murray, those are 2 guys that I would absolutely move my way into with immense confidence at this point. So don't think that it has to stop at Cousins and Bryce Young. Those are just the 2 most adjacent options that are not Dak Prescott. Of course, if you can make your way to Purdy, do it. If you can make your way to Kyler, do it. But with Deshaun, I think it's just too shaky right now. Okay. Now, there's 2 quarterbacks that you and I are going to go over. That's the first one. The second quarterback is another one that I think has had a moderate resurgence in value of late, but I'm also not biting on this one either, and that is Desmond Ridder, of course, of the Atlanta Falcons. The last 2 weeks, if we pull up his game log here, he's finished QB6 in back-to-back weeks, 26.2 fantasy points per game in week 5, 19.1 last week on 47 pass attempts. you look at him and you look at his current ranking on Dynasty Calculator, Fantasy Calc, and he is currently the QB 24 squeezed between Russell Wilson and Derek Carr. So Desmond Ridder, where's your confidence on Ridder? And if you're a rebuilder, and you and I have him on some tandem rosters, and we're actively trying to move him right now, what are you doing with Ridder?
I'm selling Ridder off after the back-to-back QB6 games. Again, he has, he's QB6 in rushing touchdowns, and he's performed decently well here the last 2 weeks, but he's QB 45. The bad thing is he's QB 45 in PFF grade. He's QB3 in turnover worthy player rate. And and this whole sell is his fantasy rushing upside, right? He's QB 19 in rushing yards per game.
Right.
So he's at the very bottom in passer rating as well. He's a very inefficient passer with, below average rushing yards per game with a few rushing touchdowns that has kind of insulated really his value for right now in this small amount of time. And I think if I'm an owner of Desmond Ridder, which we are, I would be actively selling the, QB6 games right now, just because I know for a fact that he's going to have some really, really, really poor QB play coming up for the rest of the season.
Now, I told myself I wasn't going to swear before this episode started, but Desmond Ridder has bed shitter written all over him, Ridder all over him. And I am definitely concerned. You and I have him in a league or a couple leagues. And the concern is that which is the player that he really is. This guy's a third-round pick. I don't believe he's necessarily the answer. We've heard the Caleb Williams talk. We've heard about free agency. We've heard Kyler's name thrown out there. All these names exist, and this is a team with a multitude of weapons, right? And they want to run the ball. The problem for me with Ridder, again, I mentioned he's coming off 2 top 6 performances in a row. He's averaging 33.5 pass attempts per game, which is in the top 13. That's great. Top 3 protection rate for Desmond Ridder also. So great offensive line around him. You mentioned the grade, QB 45, not good. I don't know if you guys know, there's only 32 starting quarterbacks in the league. And then Atlanta has been trailing on 73% of their plays. Now, I brought this up about CJ Stroud a couple weeks ago. When the Houston Texans are trailing, CJ Stroud is empowered to throw the ball more frequently than nearly every quarterback in the NFL. The Atlanta Falcons, when they're trailing, and they have been trailing on 3/4 of the plays that they've had in the NFL this year, they have a pass rate of just 52%. So they're essentially on a neutral basis between run and pass. So when they're trailing, they're not even saying, Desmond, we need you to go win a game with Kyle Pitts and Drake London. They're like, it's a gamble on whether we're going to run it or pass it. The other problem, you mentioned it, low rushing floor. You're not bringing that to the table. And yes, you said he is having his fantasy value buoyed by a few rushing touchdowns, but I can assure you with Bijan and Tyler Algier, a majority of those opportunities is going to be gobbled up. Now, if this was Josh Allen, maybe you can make a slightly different case. It's not. It's Desmond G.D. Ridder. That's me trying to be PC on this episode. The other problem is he's really not pushing it downfield. QB 25 and adjusted yards per attempt. So you're really not getting the deep usage, deep ball pass attempts this year in the top 15, but you're really not getting deep usage. You're not getting a rushing floor. You're probably not going to get the rushing touchdowns. And at any given moment, he could revert back to the Desmond Ridder that we witnessed last year. And if I pull up his game log from 2022, let it cycle, only 4 games when he came in, obviously not great in those games. And then thus far in 2023, started out the year stink bomb in week 1. Week 2, again, interception, but he ran one in. That kind of saved him there, as you mentioned. 2 bad weeks in a row. And then here we go again, Houston and Washington. So it's a little bit of a phantom situation. With that being said, if you have Desmond Ridder on a rebuilder, much like a contender, if you can ride it out as a contender because you need quarterback help, sure, I get it. I don't think he's going anywhere this year. I think in 2023, you can feel confident that he's probably going to continue to be the starter in this offense. But as you and I talked about before the show started, if this team goes and drafts a guy in a similar fashion as a Will Levis in the second round, you're going to have almost no confidence going into 2024 with a quarterback battle and Ridder locking that job down, right?
Absolutely. I think that there's potential that even if the Falcons are 500, that there's potential that one of these quarterbacks, the Bo Nixes of the world, fall down to the top of the second round and they throw a late first or a mid first round on Bo Nix. Someone like that has this kind of rushing up grade, or they get one of these guys in the second round that can compete with him. I think Desmond Ridder definitely has competition going into next year. If not, there's some of these elite quarterbacks like Kyler Murray available on the market. Who knows if Kirk Cousins stays in Minnesota, he could end up being moved. And then there's guys like Justin Fields with the Chicago Bears having potentially the first and second overall pick. We could see a situation where Justin Fields is traded over to the Falcons, and then they kind of play a similar role. But I think I would definitively state that Justin Fields is a far better passer than Desmond Ridder at this point.
Is that crazy? I mean, is that a crazy?
I don't even think it's crazy. I mean, QB 45 is just insane, and I think that anybody would be a potential upgrade. I think it's just, I mean, he's 6 for 6. He's got 6 touchdowns and 6 interceptions. I think if somebody needs a quarterback and he's got some sort of rushing floor, he's going to be there for the year. Yeah, another insulated, just sell on the insulation to a contender who needs a QB.
Yep.
Then that's what I would do. I think move off of it, sell them high as soon as you can.
I think the case with Ridder, if I can move, so now Fantasy Cal claims that a 2025 first is relative to Ridder. Here's the deal, as you're well aware, or for the audience that doesn't know this, when you expand a year further out than the incoming draft class, those are devalued picks. Now, for the leagues that you play in, a lot of leagues will force you to pay up an advanced year if you're going to trade that pick. But if I could take a guy like Ridder and pair him with a player to move into a 2025 first, I would probably do that too, because a couple things are at play. One, you're getting a first-round pick for a guy that you never should have gotten a first-round pick for. And number two, obviously this is going to a contender, but number two, you don't know what that guy's roster looks like in 2021. You and I have a tandem roster together. McCaffrey got banged up. We lost Connor. We lost Nick Chubb. We've got injuries at quarterback. Like, anything can happen to these really stellar rosters in the blink of an eye. And that 2025 first, that's 2 years out. That owner might think, I could make this play because it's going to be a late first and I'm getting a quarterback and I'm getting a piece. Mm-hmm. When in reality, that entire situation could fundamentally change in the blink of an eye if dealt to the right person.
Absolutely. I think they're devalued, but they're still valuable because down the line, you don't know what the landscape of your roster will look like with the extreme amount of variance with injuries.
Right. So that's just something to think about. If you could pair a player with it, somebody that's got relative value to that, to get yourself into the game. Again, I like Michael Wilson, but I'm not really opposed to the idea of Desmond Ridder and Michael Wilson to move into a 2025 first. Like, I don't know what the realistic outcome is for a guy like Michael Wilson. He's flashing, but you can utilize that opportunity, a player like that, to move into it. Now, there might be some people out there that are overly sold on Wilson, and I think he's fine, but the reality of a third-round pick and the historical odds of a guy like that hitting are not significant. But I can assure you that you will not be upset if you're picking at 109, 110 in a 2025 class. Desmond Ridder is selling Reebok shoes at Foot Locker, and Michael Wilson is the wide receiver 4 on the Arizona Cardinals at that point in time. So I don't think it's crazy at all. Desmond Ridder is a guy that you really do have to consider moving off of.
Absolutely.
We're trying to keep you in line, Alexander. We're trying to keep you from being the choppiest man that there ever was. I don't think it's so bad right now. It's I've heard worse. Okay. You sound pretty good. You're pretty clear. While you're clear, we should go while the getting's good. Let's talk about our first running back. If this screen will change for me, how about Miles Sanders, who is miles away from the Miles Sanders that I saw last year, currently So he signs this contract in Carolina and think that it's all green grass until we find out that Carolina's got a lot of problems. And now here's Miles Sanders at 26 and a half years old and sort of on the outside looking in for some people. Where are you at on Miles Sanders, and why should rebuilders consider moving off of him?
Well, if you're a rebuilder, you should immediately sell Miles Sanders. I think he's got a contract with the Panthers, but he's extremely inefficient. I mean, he was averaging, even back in 2021, he was averaging 5.5 yards per carry. At this point, he's averaging 3.1 yards per carry and is potentially in a 50-50, timeshare with Chuba Hubbard. I think the contract that he signed insulates his value for at least this year, maybe potentially next year. So you could sell that to one of these teams that is facing one of these injuries to, one of these star running backs, someone like Christian McCaffrey, who may be back, but, may be out a week or so, or someone that has suffered even a bigger injury, someone like James Conner or even Nick Chubb, if they're still contending. But man, it does not look very good. I think he's even got 2 fumbles on the year. He's low ratings in every running back metric. It's like RB40 in like every efficiency metric that there is. It's not good, and I don't see a situation where a 27-year-old running back, he's going to be 27 at some point here this year, that he doesn't hit a wall and the team ends up splitting the carries with him.
It's what do you say, right? I mean, you've talked about this. PFF, did you mention PFF's grade on him? The running back 110.
They're all low. Literally, you could look up any single metric and any sort of efficiency metric, whether it's rushing or receiving. He's near the bottom at everything. I think the only thing that you can sell somebody on is he's RB9 in targets.
Yes.
But otherwise, it's weighted opportunity 16. Snap share is 25. Again, he's 54% snap share. So it's getting close where Chuba Hubbard is sneaking up there. And really, what's the difference between Chuba Hubbard and Miles Sanders at this point, if it not the contract that the Miles Sanders signed? I think if someone desperately needs a running back, and there's teams out there that are needing a running back because there's injuries, that you are a real rebuilder, this is the type of player that you immediately sell for what value he's at right now, because I can assure you it's probably going to go down, if not stay where it's at right now at this point.
It's hard to bounce back. Now, his contract with Carolina was signed through 2026, but he only has $2.5 million of dead cap to enter 2025. So he's going to be a fundamental part of this offense to some degree in 2024. It may be a Jalen Warren, Najee Harris type backfield where it's a lot more even than you would have liked it to. But again, he lost it on his own. You mentioned the total targets. The silver lining is that he's the RB10 overall in target share at 13%. That has been working in his favor. Also, one of the negatives, and I don't see this necessarily getting better just yet, Carolina's run blocking rating is number 31 in the NFL. So that's working against him as well. So you have a team that's struggling to throw the ball with any superiority. They can't run block. He's not looking like himself. He's got somebody on his heels who's catching up to him. In fact, if you're looking at the screen on fantasycalc.com, him and Chuba Hubbard are essentially side by side. And you look at Miles Sanders' value over the last 30 days, he's lost over 840 points in their system, which is a significant margin of value to lose. That essentially means that he fell from about the range of Joe Mixon, so the RB 23 to 24, all the way down now to where you find him at the RB 39. Now, for a contending roster, and I'm being dead serious, I don't know that I would be totally opposed to the idea of, like, if I could move into Kendre Miller in a third or something like that, where the guy knows Kendre Miller's not necessarily going to play, but he's getting Miles Sanders as a starter. If you can make that work, but I'm not even sure if a Kendre Miller owner would do that at this point. But I would want to move off Miles Sanders. It says that a 2024 second would be available for him. If you're a rebuilder, I would probably take the pick. I mean, I know it sounds really crappy, but I would probably take the pick based on what we're seeing. Even if Miles Sanders starts to turn the corner, I don't feel like Carolina is going to go away from Chuba Hubbard. And I think that's my biggest concern now. And we've lost Alexander. Alexander is
the other things. Oh, he lost me. I was about to
go on your heater. This is it. Let's go. You got it.
I think the problem is like, again, we talked about this before this show. His average defenders in the box, he's RB 55, and he's running for 3.1 yards per carry. Now I know offensive line is an issue, but I mean, this is a guy that's like he's 5'11", 211, with the 4.49. He was one of these size speed freaks that we were all going crazy over. And I think really it's one of those things that how is he doing this with not that many defenders in the box?
It's amazing that he's still in Saquon's shadow and he doesn't even play with him anymore. It's quite a turn of events. All right, let's move on to the next running back. This is a player that might shock people, but bear with us. I feel confident in my statements here. Tony Pollard, obviously, Dallas Cowboys running back, has the backfield to himself after Ezekiel Elliott leaves, ends up as a New England Patriot. But Tony Pollard, who's on a one-year deal currently and didn't have a feature role until this year, is 26 and a half years old and does not look like the version of himself last year that we all fell in love with in a part-time role. Why should people that are rebuilders consider moving off of Tony Pollard?
I think the issue is the efficiencies are his yards per carry, he's RB 44, and he's RB 41 in evaded tackles. The whole sell on him was he was just a crazy efficient runner in limited capacity, and that all he needed was the workload to go up. And I think that he kind of has hit a wall with the workload going up. Now he's RB 10, and he's RB 10 in just total touches, and then RB4 in weighted opportunity, RB3 in targets, and he's RB2 in red zone touches. But I think the yards per carry coupled with the evaded tackles, if he doesn't hit the threshold of this elite rusher, what incentivizes the Dallas Cowboys to give him a long-term extension, if not give him another one-year deal where he's one of these rentals? I think on top of that, we haven't really seen him hit like this crazy threshold of being this elite rusher that we expected him to be once Zeke left. And I think at this point, there's a question if he doesn't perform at a very, very high level that he may not even take the money and wholesale and being the Dallas Cowboys running back. He may be a running back somewhere else and maybe more in a timeshare role. And he ends up being in a situation similar to Miles Sanders.
Well, I'll tell you this much. I'm going to give you a dark potential thing here. I don't know where he goes. It very well might not be Dallas, but doesn't it feel like a free agent like Derrick Henry is going to be the next Dallas Cowboys running back? Like that feels like Jerry Jones' wet dream. I'm concerned that even if Pollard signs an extension, a one-year extension with the Dallas Cowboys, that competition's going to come in and we're going to see him sort of battle for opportunity in this backfield. And you look at his production. So without Zeke in Dallas, he's still just been the RB 16 in opportunity share. So he didn't skyrocket up to the top. That's a 66.5% opportunity share. He's not up there at the upper echelon of these other running backs. He's literally, without Zeke, getting an opportunity share, which is the combination of targets and rush attempts. He's next to Dameon Pierce and Isaiah Pacheco. Like, I don't even qualify Isaiah Pacheco as a pass catcher, but somehow these two guys are side by side despite the fact that you can't even name the second running back in Dallas. Now, we look at him. He's the RB25 in fantasy points per opportunity. In 2022, he was the RB6 in fantasy points per opportunity. And like you said, that was the big sell, what we saw last year, but he's not as efficient as he was last year. If we look at yards created, yards per touch, last year, both inside the top 8. EPA, top 27. You look at those numbers this year, yards created, yards per touch, top 50 or worse. EPA, the running back, 126. Now, EPA is a funny metric because the closer you get to the end zone, the more valuable the touches are, and things can change as Dallas offense has been funky. But nonetheless, he hasn't looked like he did the year prior, which was, as you mentioned, the entire sell. His target share is up 5%, which is nice to see. But overall, he's not the player from 2022. Now, with that being said, he is still being valued as a top 10 running back in Dynasty right now. We could pull this up, or maybe he moves slightly. Okay, Tony Pollard is the RB8. Now, it's possible that this changed due to last night's game, but I will tell you for a fact, when you look at Tony Pollard last night, 15 carries for 30 yards. That's 2 yards a carry. And then in the passing game, 6 for 80, but that's because one catch went for 60 yards. Otherwise, he would have been 5 for 20 in a woefully inefficient evening, which once again looks like the evenings that he's had in a bunch of other games prior. So here he is at the RB8. What I wanted to do, Alexander, was filter back in the wide receivers just to put on display sort of what his relative value is. Right now, Fantasy Calc is saying that it's possible for you to either trade your way out of Pollard into other running backs or land a player like Devonta Smith, move into a player like Drake London, supposedly Puka Nacua, T. Higgins, DJ Moore, DK Metcalf. I mean, I'm going to be honest with you. I'm willing to move into every one of those players over Tony Pollard.
Absolutely. The sky's the limit with that top 10 rating as of right now. I think it's as we continue to see him get this workload and remain potentially inefficient. I mean, you referenced it right there. The Chargers are literally like it's Swiss cheese there for the Chargers defense, and he couldn't really do anything last night, and that's indicative of this 6-game stretch so far of 2023. I think with evaluation of RB8 and you are a rebuilder, Tony Pollard is a major sell because of all the red flags, the inefficiencies, the contract, the looming potential of adding in another running back to kind of spell him sort of in that Zeke role. That he's 26 and a half years old. Like, yep. He's going to hit 27. He's going to be in this threshold where we were looking at, Kareem Hunt, who was more efficient even in a limited capacity. I just think he's one of these backs that probably has so many red flags and still has a top 10 evaluation in Dynasty that if you're a rebuilder, you gotta trade away and take the value, and you can get so many good players for one player.
I'm gonna be very honest with you. Looking at this list and going off of my calibrated Dynasty brain, I'm gonna tell you right now, you are probably not getting Drake London for him based on recent performance. You're not getting Puka Nacua for him. You could get Devonta Smith. Now that is a possible trade to a team that needs a running back. Devonta's been kind of in the shadow of A.J. Brown much of this year. That's possible. I think a T. Higgins trade is possible with what's happened to him this year. The sweet spot for me has been DK Metcalf. I wrote an article on Patreon, patreon.com/I'm outraged. I wrote an article recently with 3 dynasty buys at wide receiver, and to me, seeing DK Metcalf at the wide receiver 18, despite what we've seen from Seattle this year, is to me, is pretty low. And this is a guy that's performed as an alpha in the past. If I can make my way into a guy that looks like Julio Jones, who's not even 26 years old yet and has proven himself time and time again, I would love to do that. Hell, I would move into DJ Moore at 26 and a half. Clearly, the guy still has the most elite traits amongst the league. So there are a lot of ways that you can slice this up. I know some people are a little lower on Puka because of the last performance, but I think there's still a lot of faith in him. So to me, Devonta Smith, if you can move into him, DJ Moore, obviously, DK Metcalf. I mean, do you think anybody can make their way to London? It's going to require some other pieces, but he's played pretty well of late. The targets have come around. I think that's going to be a tough buy at 22 years old.
Yeah, at 22 years old.
And Doug.
What the?
And Doug says you
Where
can
are these
customize
coming
and
from?
save hundreds on car insurance with Liberty Mutual.
Whoa, we're running ads on our show. I talked about it at the beginning of this episode. Holy shit. Scared the crap out of me.
Shit out of me.
Wow. Woo.
All right. Well, that was a soundbite to say,
yeah,
no, you're probably not going to be able to get Drake London based off of his recent performance. Irregardless of Desmond Ridder being his quarterback, he's getting the targets now that he was getting last year, and he's performing extremely well, and he's 22 years old. So yeah, he's one of those players that is ascending and is someone that you're probably not going to get Tony Pollard for. But like you said, DK Metcalf, 25 and a half. almost 26 years old, in still the alpha in that offense, size, speed freak, right? And I think if you could move into someone like that, who could be the target leader, it would be amazing. I think Tony Pollard is, if you're an owner of Tony Pollard, you're in a great spot because someone's definitely willing to buy Tony Pollard just because of what he has done in the past. And they're willing to ignore what his inefficiencies have had this year, just because of almost like the brand equity associated with being the Dallas Cowboys running back.
Well, and look at the difference here. We talked about this guy last week. Look at the difference between Tony Pollard and DeAndre Swift. DeAndre Swift is 2.5 years younger, 5 spots apart. If I can move into DeAndre Swift plus from Tony Pollard, if you wanted to maintain the running back, if that was your concern, and we know that the running back shelf life and the value, it can erode very quickly with injuries, with age, with utilization. Look at Jahmyr Gibbs. For me, moving into a guy like Swift, not against it if I'm getting a plus on top of that. Or again, if you can move into somebody, even Jahmyr Gibbs, I'll be honest with you. If I can make my way to Gibbs, who's pretty insulated, I wouldn't be opposed to that. But I think looking at guys like DK Metcalf, guys like DJ Moore might be the better long-term play, knowing how thirsty dynasty players are for wide receiver help, right?
Absolutely. I think, yeah. And if you can rebuild your team with great aged wide receivers that are target hogs in their offenses, I think that's the way to rebuild your roster. And then if you can add picks or value plays on top of that, I mean, that's the way to rebuild your team.
There's very few running backs that were borderline 5th round that have held as much value as Tony Pollard has, considering his body of work prior to it. This is not an Aaron Jones, Austin Eckler thing where they were just dominant. Absolutely dominant in the face of everything year over year over year. So I think the reality is it's a little late in his career to have this sort of breakout as we're entering age 27. And at the running back position, that cliff has really taken place. Now, that's age 27. This is a running back that's 28. If we go back in time a couple of weeks, we advocated him as a buy, but we advocated him as a buy on contending rosters. We said, hey, go send a 2nd-round pick for this guy. And by the way, if you did, you're welcome.
That was easy.
Because Alvin Kamara is absolutely smoking everything. I mean, a bit of a renaissance in terms of fantasy performances. Look at his game log so far, 21.4 fantasy points per game, 18.7 and 17.4. 3 top 10 performances in a row, and you were getting this dude for a second for a long period of time.
Absolutely. I think, again, he's 28, but he's got that, we referenced it the last time, he's got that massive contract, which almost guarantees the opportunity. He's, opportunity share is number 7. He's number 7 in targets, and he's only played, 3 games? Again, he's performing at a high level because he's still efficient somewhat with his, he's still averaging 3.8 yards per carry, which, again, it's still below, but he's done it before in 2021. But the key with Kamara was always been the targets, and he's still getting the targets and the red zone opportunities that I think, yeah, if you're someone that is, again, rebuilding, you should sell this to somebody for the highest value you can get, because he's 28 years old, and now he's got someone like Kendre Miller sitting in the back there that eventually will start to eat away at his opportunity. Maybe not this year, but the following years coming up, that will eat in, and there'll be more of a conversation next year where 29-year-old Alvin Kamara is dealing with 22-year-old Kendre Miller.
Alvin Kamara is the RB 15 on Fantasy Calc right now. That's almost a shocking statement to hear, considering coming into this year, everybody thought he was absolutely dust. And by the way, his yards per carry, Le'Veon Bell averaged like 3.8 for a year or two in there and was an absolute monster because the targets were there, the red zone work was there. But he's essentially being valued right now close to a 2024 first. Now, I don't think you're going to get that. This is not accurate. There's no way you're getting a 2024 first for Alvin Kamara. But with that being said, you're exactly right. This is a guy where if you're a contender, he's a buy for sure. And now I don't even know if you can necessarily get him for the second that you could before. Now you almost have to plus that second, which is kind of a crappy position to be in. But what I wanted to bring up on this episode, because I thought this was important, part of the sales tactic here, if you're the rebuilder, is going, hey, like Alexander just said, this guy's contract is so heavy, they can't do anything with him for the next year plus. And Kendre Miller hasn't been a factor necessarily just yet. Look at all the target opportunity that's gone to, Alvin Kamara. He's number 1 in the league in target share at 23.4%. He's getting a ton of opportunity. Again, opportunity share, top 7 at the position, 77.8%, greater than Tony Pollard's is. And you've got 3 big games in a row. You could sell them on the idea like you are a piece away from winning a title. Here's a guy that's currently averaging 19.2 fantasy points per game, is a focal point of this offense, looks a lot like himself in previous years in terms of performance and opportunity. Why wouldn't you want this player? So I think you can absolutely get more than the second that we were talking about. In fact, there's probably a case where if you take Alvin Kamara and you put a second with Kamara and you move your way into a first plus, or you could do some sort of package to move your way into a first, because we know that Kamara is going to decline over time. If it's not this year, possibly next year. If it's not next year, it's the year after. But if I'm a contender and I'm getting Kamara and something I can use, I would probably consider the idea of a late first, knowing that your pick is probably early, right? So let's call your pick 201, 202, 203, because I need to put this psychology in people's heads. I'm a contender. My pick is probably 110, 111, 112. People hear, oh, you're going to give a first for Kamara in a second. Guys, those picks are like 4 spots apart, 5 spots apart. It's not that far apart. And guess what? For those of you that had the 107 and thought it was so juicy, how's Quentin Johnston working out for you? So it doesn't really matter what your location is in the draft round if you're just going to make the pick and fuck it up. So I can see Kamara in a second moving that into a first or parlaying that into something, because you tell the guy, you go, look, the difference between your first and my second is not that far apart. You're getting Alvin Kamara. Why not? And I can see that deal going through to a guy that wants all this fantasy production. So opportunities exist. But again, if you were a contender, you should have bought him. If you're a rebuilder, you need to get off of him. And this is the point in time to do it, because a lot of the players in your league, even these contending teams that are 4-2, 3-3, they're looking for that subtle nudge, or even 5-1, guys that lost Connor like we did, guys that lost Chubb, guys that had Jahmyr Gibbs for some reason. He's not performing, and they've been winning on big quarterback games, or they have Devon Achane or somebody where they've sort of been shouldering opportunity and getting wins, or Kyron Williams. I don't know. And they want to move into something more stable. And that's really the key of Kamara, is the stability and the performance level that he's giving you. He's playing at an elite level. I mean, his fantasy points per game are elite, right?
That's elite. Yeah, so, absolutely. I mean, it's elite. He's a fantastic player.
So
at this point in time,
there's no count. There's really no counter argument to it at this point in time. Unfortunately, he's just playing so well. We're sort of waiting for the wheels to fall off, but you give the benefit of the doubt to Alvin Kamara because he's just done this time and time again. Here's who hasn't done it time and time again. Jerry Jeudy. We were high on Jerry Jeudy. We were so high on Jerry Jeudy. Maybe it was like oxygen. The air was too thin. We were so high on Jerry Jeudy. We're up there so far, and we got out, over our skis, and then he didn't perform like we expected. Russell Wilson has kind of looked like Russell Wilson last year, maybe slightly better. But Jerry Jeudy, still 24.5. A lot of hopes for people. Got called out by Steve Smith. It was funny. I jokingly tweeted. Did you see my tweet? I said 3 and 26 incoming, implying he was going to have 3 catches for 26 yards. And then he ends up ending up the game 3 catches for 14? It was just a really funny parallel with him. But Jerry Jeudy, currently the wide receiver 61 in fantasy points per game, 8.4 per game. Where are we at on Jerry Jeudy, and why is Jerry Jeudy like the poster boy for the sell?
I mean, he's a poster boy for the sell because what you can sell to people is the fact that he potentially will be revived or turn into his upside or whatever his upside is supposed to be on another team. Because obviously there's rumors that Jeudy is potentially on the outs and they're listening to offers for him and are obviously unhappy with him. But if you are a rebuilding team, I think you sell because you let Jerry Jeudy be a problem for someone else. You let someone else wait for Jerry Jeudy to become the Jerry Jeudy that was drafted in the first round by the Denver Broncos, because he's getting a 71% snap share. You showed it there. He's wide receiver 56 and 8.4 fantasy points per game. He's wide receiver 51 in targets. He's wide receiver 41 in yards after catch, and that's one of the things that we loved about him. And also the other thing we loved about him was his separation, but he's wide receiver 20 in separation. It's just not there. I think we were all, some of us were, I think some of us were sold on the Sean Payton offense and potentially a Russell Wilson career revival here. And he has played better. But I think at this point in time, let Jerry Jeudy be someone else's problem and go from there and take as what value you can get from him. And especially with the unknown, a lot of people in the fantasy space love the unknown, right? And whether or not, maybe he could be better if he goes to Carolina, or another roster that needs a wide receiver, or he goes to one of these, contending teams that has an injury to their, starting wide receiver. It's one of those situations where let the unknown be your focal point of selling him to somebody else and talk about the draft capital and stuff like that. But I mean, the players he's around right now, I think it's a conversation. Like, would you rather have Josh Downs at this point over Jerry Jeudy? I think I would. Josh Downs has performed pretty damn well in comparison, and he's 22 years old on a rookie deal, the first year of his rookie deal. Jerry Jeudy is just, I feel like, a massive sell. I think the idea of him was great. There were traits that we really liked about him, but I just don't think he can put it all together. He may be one of those guys that's like a wide receiver 3 on another team. That's his best outcome, but as of right now, it's not looking great, and I would sell to a contender on the unknown factor.
I'm with it. I can't wait to get a censorship sound because I want to put one on here. I would take, without a doubt, with no hesitation, Jakobi Meyers right now, all day long over Jerry Jeudy. I don't even know why they're so close to each other. I would go for Deontay Johnson right now, to be quite honest with you. Deontay is sort of a sleeping player who nobody's really kept tabs on right now. He's been missing for multiple weeks. He's going to come back. I would ship him for Jameson Williams if I could get my hands on Jameson Williams, if I had to plus that a little bit. I don't know that, again, you got Tank Dell over here. There's a lot of players. Jerry Jeudy's just not the player he was last year. He was exceptional last year. He looks like a basket case this year. Watching him peacock around after getting called out by Steve Smith was one of the more maddening moments I had ever seen. Then watching him go out and just crap the bed in a primetime game was like, dude, what is going on with Jerry Jeudy? And it's in the numbers. Jerry Jeudy's just not good by the metrics. Russell Wilson, this Denver roster doesn't look very good. And as Alexander said, you're trying to sell people on the dream. You're trying to sell them on the what could be. Here's a question for you. Jerry Jeudy or Quentin Johnston?
I mean, that's a question. Again, it's kind of like, which flavor of unknown is really what you want, right? You've seen literally nothing from Quentin Johnston, right? Except snaps go up. I think it's one of the, we've had a conversation and we still are in the works of building something like this, a metric, but I think we're kind of hit a point of no return maybe with Jerry Jeudy. I mean, we have years of evidence of who he is. It's hard, especially with the red flags with Quentin Johnston's profile. I would probably take the risk and see if I'm a rebuilder, bet on a player on a significantly better offense.
It's a hell of a gamble. I think the difference is that we know Jerry Jeudy is going to have a productive ability somewhere. I think what we also know about Jerry Jeudy is that the league knows that Jerry Judy's not a wide receiver 1. He's a wide receiver 2 in an offense that has great route running capability, as we've seen in the past. He's a guy that can get open when his head is in the game. And he's a player that on any given week could get you 7 catches for 90 yards if you need it. He's a good football player, but he doesn't have that ceiling, and Denver is an atrocious situation. They're probably going to have a multitude of fire sales going on here in the future. It sounds like they're going to tear this thing down. So I would be interested to see where he goes, but he's a definite sell if you're a rebuilding roster. And like Alexander said, again, sell on the dream. You could hold him until the trade takes place, or you could hold him past the trade deadline. It may be more value in the allure of the potential of the trade right now than waiting and then realizing, oh crap, Denver's still got him. So that might be the way to play it. As far as Josh Downs, I like Josh Downs. I've got my druthers about what these types of players can be in the long term. I think if you're in best ball, Josh Downs is in play for me conversationally. If you're in best ball, I would say that's in play. But if we're in head-to-head lineups, I don't know that Josh Downs is as much in play for me, and I would probably try to do something with Jerry Jeudy that can move me into a player with more upside. Again, Jerry Jeudy in a second into Deontay Johnson, I would probably do that right now just because I got to get the hell off Jerry Jeudy. I got to get out of Jerry Jeudy town. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
We're at 56 minutes currently, so we're going to jump through a couple of these last players right here. These two, at least 2 or 3. We'll see where we get towards the end of this thing. These ones are fun. Now, this guy started out week 1 like an absolute monster, and everybody was like, I told you so. This is the guy. That's Calvin Ridley with the Jacksonville Jaguars. We saw him doing the ladder drills in the offseason, and his feet look really fast, and everybody's like, he's back. He's back because he's running ladder drills. And then we saw that he came out in week 1, looked like an absolute league winner, put up 24.1 fantasy points per game, 8 catches, 101 yards, and a touchdown. And since then, a lot of cricket performances, and then just another little flash here recently that sort of may have reintroduced him to the trade market for those of you trying to move off of Calvin Ridley. So Calvin Ridley, in his current situation, why is he a sell for rebuilding rosters?
I think he's a sell for rebuilding rosters, number one, because he's 28 and almost 29 years old, right?
Yep.
Wide receiver. Yep. He's obviously on his second team. He's also on the last year of his deal. Now, if he continues these up and down trends, I question really what the difference would be between him and Zay Jones, who's already signed through 2024, other than maybe he signs a deal so he could stay with the team to be a part of this offense. But the number one reason why he's a sell was the whole thing that he was going to be the alpha in this offense. But through the last 5 games, Calvin Ridley has an 18.5% target share, while Christian Kirk has a 25.8% target share. He's being out-targeted by Christian Kirk, and everyone told us that he was supposed to be the monster target hog leader within this offense. If he's not that, and he's 29, and he's kind of has these up and down performances, which leads to kind of like a slightly above average performance, right? I think at this point, you sell the upside that still exists there because he's going to have up and down performances. It's almost like he's almost performing at like a slightly better version of Gabe Davis at this point, where he has these crazy boom weeks. You see the explosiveness, but then he will literally just put a stinker out there on any given Sunday. Christian Kirk is significantly is a significant part of this offense. And Zay Jones has been hurt, but Zay Jones was a big time leader in red zone targets as well. So he's eating into Ridley's usage. So that's not going away. So he comes back. I think you sell the allure of the Trevor Lawrence Ridley experience to a contending team who needs a wide receiver 2 probably on their offense. And you take the value that you can get from him, because again, he was one of the biggest favorites as the hidden sleeper within here. My concern was the time away from football. He had, that one crazy year where he was 18.8 fantasy points per game, but that was on 143 targets back with Matt Ryan, right? And if he's not going to earn 143 targets in this Trevor Lawrence offense, I kind of want to move away from an asset that, feels like he's on the last year's deal. I kind of repeat myself, but yeah, I'd see what value you can get for Calvin Ridley because significant age, and he's just not getting the usage that he was everyone deemed he was supposed to be.
And you look at Calvin Ridley right now, 7.3 targets per game is what we're seeing. Christian Kirk, 8.2. As you mentioned, Kirk, his snap share, even higher. I was bringing this up on the screen. It's leveled out a bit here. But the problem with Ridley, I guess if you're going to sales pitch him to somebody, look, if you're the smart owner, you realize the guy's 29 years old. He's missed a lot of football. He's in a new situation. He's had some pop performances that have been really good. 2 top 10 finishes so far this year. But the sales pitch, as you can see right here, is that 4 of his 6 outings have come on the backbone of over 100 air yards. So it's the what could be factor. In addition to the fact that he's wide receiver 19 in air yards per game at 90.3. So that is slightly volume-based. Again, he had 100 air yards on 11 targets in week 1. Okay, this is not Jamar Chase, who's got 169 air yards on 4 targets. It's not quite the same game being played here, but that doesn't matter. Keenan Allen, a monster. Cooper Kupp, a monster. You don't have to win on air yards long downfield. So I would sell Ridley probably pretty quickly here, knowing that he put himself back on the map a week or 2 ago. He's got the week 1 performance. I think there's still questions about, is Christian Kirk the guy? I think that Trevor Lawrence believes in Christian Kirk the most, continues to lean on him the same way he did last year. Christian Kirk is now the new Tyler Lockett, by the way. Just to be very clear, Christian Kirk, new Tyler Lockett. He's just going to continue to do his thing. Steady Freddy, give you 14.5, 15 fantasy points per game. Nobody will ever accept it. He'll always be outside the top 40 wide receivers. You'll be able to pick him up in every league if you want him. But Calvin Ridley is a definite sell if you're a rebuilding roster for a multitude of reasons, turning age 29, not being excluded from that list. So move on from Calvin Ridley. The last receiver that we might go over right now, I know we want to get to another guy. We'll see where we get. I'm going to tease an additional player after this, but I'm going to lean into this guy right now because his situation has been very interesting thus far in 2023, and that's Deebo Samuel. This is a guy that almost never comes up in conversation. For whatever reason, he's just kind of been in the background. He's been performing well this year, but he sort of remains in the background conversationally. I'll pull up his game log right here. So Deebo Samuel in 2023, he is 27.7 years old. He's going to be 28 years old this year. Why is Deebo a sell on rebuilding rosters?
I think Deebo's a sell because I think at this point he's got, he's had 2 20-point performances this year, but I think it's more of the fact that, his usage is not really there for what you would expect with what he had done back in 2021. Back in 2021, on 77 receptions, he had 1,400 yards. He was a yards after catch monster, and he was also getting a significant amount of rushing shares, which now are being eaten up by Christian McCaffrey. And so it's one of those things like he's a yards after catch freak, and yards after catch are sometimes sticky to a point, and he has these boom weeks and stuff like that. But I think some rosters, whoever had them before, were sold that they had like a top 10, top 5, wide receiver after 2021. And he's not getting the same workload that he was getting, back in that 2021 year. This was only on 120 targets that he had 1,400 yards receiving, which is insane. It was an incredible year, but I think that's his peak. And really what he is more is just this 13, points per game fantasy wide receiver that right now you can get at a huge value at what he's at. And I think it's only going to go down because of the play that you see from someone like Brandon Ayuk, who can potentially get a 5th-year option. He's obviously on the end of his first-round contract. But Brock Purdy is a 7th-round draft pick. They don't have to pay him for another 2 years, right? And so they're going to continue to build around this team to try to win a Super Bowl over that rookie contract. That I could see a scenario with how well Ayuk is playing in this offense that he gets a contract extension and continues to eat into this workload. Christian McCaffrey has a massive contract with the Niners. He's eating into that rushing workload that he received in 2021. I think you're really kind of getting a middling wide receiver too that has some boom weeks. Again, it's one of those examples. Again, one of those guys that could win you a week, but he's not going to win you every week. And that's the problem with Deebo Samuel. And if you're a rebuilding team, you need to sell those to a contender, especially with 28 years old, and see what maximum value you can get, because you're still 2 years removed and he's had some boom weeks. You can sell on the brand that he's got in the recency bias.
Well, he's got a decorated injury history dating all the way back to college, and he's almost 28 years old. Those two factors alone are paramount when building a case against a player on your roster. But as you mentioned, Brandon Ayuk is emerging to the point that he has a 31.9% target share this year, which is top 6 at the position. But again, for some reason, he's valued at like the wide receiver 19. Christian McCaffrey, as you mentioned, handling 22.2 touches per game. So that rushing volume that you alluded to in 2021 when he had 59 rush attempts has been significantly cut into. The other part of it is the brand that you brought up. That was 2021, the season that he really exploded. 8.5 touches per game. He's at 6.3 touches per game now. So his touches have fallen off. The leverage of the touches have fallen off. Players around him have ascended. So I think there's a lot of concern. Now, when we look at him amongst the other wide receivers, and I had him pulled up right here, I'm telling you right now, 1 for 1, if I'm getting Nico Collins for Deebo Samuel, I'm selling that right now, immediately.
Absolutely.
I don't think the Nico Collins owner is going to give you Nico Collins for Deebo Samuel, but like I would do that in a heartbeat. To be quite honest with you, if I'm looking at these players within this range, if Deebo can net you, if you can pair Deebo with something to get into a first, I just don't know. I think people know what's up with Deebo. I think people understand that he's on the decline. I think they understand that his utilization was a bit gadget. I think they've seen Brandon Ayuk do what he's been doing and now do it at an even better level. So I think that the confidence in a guy like Deebo Samuel has wavered. So you might have to go Deebo plus to move into a majority of these players. But again, I'll tell you this, because you and I are very high on him. We just acquired him in a trade. What about Deebo Samuel and Rashee Rice? Like, if there was a person that was willing to move off of Rice, and I don't know, because again, the news starts to bubble a little bit. They know that they're bringing him along. You know how this goes. It's hard to get off of these young players. But again, I would move into Deontay if I could. I would move into, there's a lot of secure players, but as a rebuilder, I know a lot of us are talking about going for future picks. So I would go Deebo if I could plus Deebo to get into a 2024 first for a really good contending team that needs a player at wide receiver. And again, as we pulled up over here, Deebo's had a couple games this year where he's been a top 12 receiver, 22-point game, 25-point game. We know some other big games are coming. You're probably going to have to plus Deebo to get what you want, but you just really do have to get off Deebo because I think the injuries are going to catch up. I think the utilization opportunity is clearly catching up. And as Alexander mentioned, this is a team that can appropriate funds or make plays to build around the explosive offense that they have. And Brock Purdy is developing into a passer that's not necessarily just so dink and dunk. And that's where we've seen Brandon Ayuk sort of flourish a little bit as well. George Kittle's become a red zone monster again in his own right. Christian McCaffrey's doing his thing. So the odd man out in terms of leverage opportunity is beginning to look like Deebo Samuel. So you have to move off of him. And I look at the idea when I bring up Deontay Johnson, who's relatively similar in age, I almost look at it like a mutual fund in a way. Like, no, Deontay's not a sexy transition, but Deontay's a safe transition. Deontay's a guy that's going to get you 8 targets a game, and he's going to put up 13 to 17 fantasy points per game, but he's probably going to stay relatively healthy. He's going to have value. He's proven himself year over year. And sometimes it's a transitional move. You have to get off of a player before they lose all their value. So if you can move into a player that's going to stabilize, for those of you crypto bros out there, a stable coin, if you will, if you want to move into that temporarily to sort of buy yourself some time going ahead, you can do that too. But again, I think Deebo is a player you have to plus.
Absolutely. And again, I think, you have to move him because he's like the cushion that can get you to what you're trying to get to, right? Like, again, you can use what he is. And if somebody needs wide receiver help, he obviously could help them in weeks, help a contender win. And like you alluded to, if you can jump back into a more stable wide receiver who gets a more consistent fantasy points per game, that's something you can build off of long term. That can be a contingent part of your roster, and then you can put your upside plays into your rookie wide receiver running backs.
Let's, just for the hell of it, let's pull up some recent Deebo Samuel trades. Should have been doing this the whole time. So this is this one right here, for instance. Wow, this is kind of surprising. 2 quarterback league, 12 team, a full PPR, start 11. Someone sent Jacoby Myers and David Njoku and half-point tight end premium. So it is tight end premium for Deebo straight up. I mean, I'm actually slightly surprised by that, by how well Jacoby's been playing. Obviously, I think somebody's probably concerned about what they've seen and think that maybe Devontae is going to come back around. Marvin Mims and Deebo for a 2024 first. That's a 2 quarterback, 14 team league. That's interesting. I mean, knowing the value of that first round pick in a 14 team league. And again, these are trades that happened today, by the way. I mean, these trades are fresh. Deebo and Kenny Pickett for Puka Nacua in a 2 quarterback, 12 team, full PPR. I guess at the end of the day, that's interesting. That's a lot of value for Puka, knowing that it's a super flex league. But if you were a team, if Pickett was your 3rd quarterback, maybe you were willing to do that. I think that's rolling the dice on how soon Pickett's going to just disappear completely, from the realm of like startable quarterback play. Okay, this is just what? Okay, wait a minute. Look at this trade. I want to go off the rails here, but CJ Stroud, Tank Dell, and Deebo for a 2025 second round pick.
I think this tool is showing you evidence of collusion.
Yes. I think that's what's showed up here. And actually, what we can do? Another cool thing in this trade, we can reduce the assets that are in it. So let's drop the assets down and research. Let's do this. We got that same Deebo trade. We'll talk about a few more here real quick. Deebo in a 3rd for Dallas Goedert, still in a half-point tight end premium. Deebo Samuel and Tyler Boyd for Devon Achane. 2 QB, 14 team, start 11, full PPR, full tight end premium. That's an interesting trade right there, knowing that Achane's value is so significant right now. And then these are the ones that are a little closer. Here's Deebo for Khalil Herbert in a 2nd. Here's Deebo for a 2nd and a 3rd. Here's Deebo for Jonathan Mingo in a 2025 2nd. That's an interesting trade. Again, the idea of rebuilding, you don't have to perpetually be a team that scores no fantasy points, right? Like you don't have to do that. And just because you are moving off Deebo in this case for Jonathan Mingo, who hasn't really done much yet, and a 2025 2nd, that doesn't mean that that's not currency to be moved back into somebody that is a productive player. But getting out of the asset before it bottoms out is truly the key here. So, all right, enough of that. I feel like I could scroll down there all day. Guys, that's fantasycalc.com. Really cool trade calculator. I like that you can look at recent trades. Again, up to today, you can change the amount of pieces in it. So you can customize it for maybe trades that you're considering, leagues that are relative to your size, all that shebang. I'm going to stop it there. This has been an hour and 20 minutes or so, Alexander. We had another guy on the list. I'm sure we'll talk about him a lot more going forward. I want to leave a little bit left in the chamber. Guys, thank you for checking this out. Again, if you're listening to this podcast on iTunes, Apple, Spotify, whatever they are, rate and review the show. Leave us a comment. Rate the show. You don't have to lie. You can be honest. You can tell me what you think. Leave us an honest rating on there. If you were on YouTube, of course, hit like, comment below somebody that we missed, why one of these players isn't a sell or who you would sell them for. And of course, if you're enjoying the content that you're seeing, hit the subscribe button before you leave. Also, in the description below, you guys will find our Discord channel. You guys can jump in there. You can hit up Alexander at Jacked Up on Mountain Dew. You can hit me up at Nate Liss. Just go in there, hit the @ symbol, and call us out, and we will come running your direction. And of course, dynastyrankings.com, guys. Go there, put in your email, and we will have updates in the future. Again, things are close. Alexander and I are working on finalizing a tool and the rankings to get those out there. This is my Dr. Dre album, as I've been told. So, Alexander, your camera is totally clear by the end of the show. I think it gave in finally. So, Thank you once again. Great job from Alexander. Thank you, everybody, for listening. This was a fun show to do. We're going to do more value shows like this in the future as we start to approach those points in Dynasty where teams have to start making some business decisions based on what their rosters look like and sort of the league format and what things look like going forward. So we'll have a lot more to talk about as we enter week 7. So good luck to all you guys. Alexander and I are going to try and pull off some more trades. So I'm sure we'll talk about those next week. So we'll see you guys there.